G'day Internet, welcome to another episode of Morgan Makes. My name's Morgan, and today we're taking a look at my new welcome sign. I hope you like it, let's take a look. So to start off with, I have these reclaimed fence planks that I'm going to sand down and clean up using my old rusty and trusty belt bench sander. This generates a lot of dust, so if you're doing something like this, wear a mask. Well, that's just good advice in general these days. Once I have the planks sanded down and looking pretty, I want something to mount them to. I had this old sheet of marine ply in the shed that I've been trying to use for a few years now, and this seems like the perfect opportunity to do so. But first I need to know how big the finished product's going to be. A few months ago, while dumpster diving, I came across this LED welcome sign. I tested it and it works. It's made out of 12 volt LEDs encased in a resin mold, so it's all one solid part, which is very nice. Using the welcome sign, I get a rough measure of how big the finished product will end up being. I trim off the crappy ends of the fence planks so the sides will look nice and cut them to a more appropriate length. I'm only going to be using 3 of the planks in this design, so I cut a piece of the ply that will fit within that footprint. Using PVA wood glue, I stick the fence planks to the plywood and let them set under weight overnight. Since I'm trying for a somewhat cool looking glow in the dark effect for the wood grain, I will be resin coating the board soon, but before I do that I need the treatment. For that I'm using the recommended treatment of Cabot's Cabothane Clear Coat. I did a bunch of test runs to find the best method for doing this. Check the annotation in the corner or the link in the description if you want to go watch that video. I'll be using Pro-Tite glass coat for the resin itself. I ended up giving the wood 3 coats of the cabothane just to make sure that it wasn't going to drink up the resin, as reclaimed timber is often very dry, even if it is exposed to the elements, and my timber was no exception. Now to make sure that none of the resin falls out the cracks in the bottom, I'm going to be using some masking tape to seal them up. I also made little walls around the top surface to contain the resin so it won't spill over the sides. Getting set up for the resin pour was a little bit daunting, I'm going to admit. I'd never done anything of this size before, so I reread the instructions, double checked everything and made a few last minute additions to my setup, but at some stage you just have to do it. I'm going to be mixing the resin with this bottle of blue glow in the dark pigment. It's not very strong, but it should make the grain stand out somewhat. Now, my inexperience was showing here. The instructions said to work in multiple batches for a large area. Now, I took that to mean that they wanted it to set somewhat before the next batch is applied. But that's only for when you're suspending something inside the resin. So I applied several batches of the Pro-Tite glass coat. The first pour had a blue pigment. The second pour I added this blue tealed pigment. Just figured it'd give it a more ethereal layered effect. It kind of worked, I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Once all the resin was poured, it was time to see what we got. Removing the masking tape reveals some ugly looking edges, and I think a lot of the resin had leaked under the board and set in there. If I'd had more resin I would have corrected it, but since I just wanted it for some set dressing, I think I can get away with it. I don't think anyone's going to look too closely at it, other than us that is. There are some bubbles on the surface that I'm not too pleased with. My gas gun ran out of juice and my heat gun made these weird little swirls on the surface. It's definitely a learning curve that I feel I'm just starting to climb. Now I have to attach the LED sign part to my newly resined board. The LEDs have these neat little screw holes for mounting, so I drew up a quick template. I figured out the final position and orientated the word welcome on the wood and very carefully drilled the holes. I wanted it slightly off center and slightly off kilter, so it, adds a little bit more visual flair to it. Thankfully my measurements were spot on and the sign fit first time. Yeah. Some M4 threaded rod and nuts with washers secured the LEDs in place. Now it's time for the electrics. Turning the sign over reveals my almost blank canvas. First things first, let's work with what we got. Terminal block pairs to make the 12 volt LED tails more manageable. And then we'll link them all together in parallel. Once 12 volts is supplied to this, the sign will light up. Simple. So let's overcomplicate things, because that's how I roll. I want it to work like a lamp. So I have a cord from a lamp. An old lamp. Waste not, want not, right? I tested it, it's fine. A mini J-box will serve nicely to protect the two 40 volt main connections. Using one of the nearby threaded rods as a kind of dodgy strain relief for the cable. Don't try this at home, kids. I'll fix it later. I don't know why, but I got a little bit experimental with this build. And even now that the video is published, I'm still not 100% sure that this project is done. Maybe I may come back to it in the future with more things to do. I used my 12 volt battery jump pack to test that all of the LED connections are still working after mounting. You can get a taste of what the final products start to look like. As I said before, and I'm probably going to say it again before we're done here today, the glow in the dark pigment was disappointingly weak sauce. So I think I need more LEDs. More! At this stage I changed my mind and decided I was going to put a border of NeoPixel LEDs to run off an Arduino Uno. But these strips that I have are only 5 volts, and at the time I didn't have any step down transformers to turn 12 into 5. I could have rigged something up, but I was feeling lazy. So instead I tried to something else from my collection of random electrical components. This is called a buck booster. It's a small step up transformer. I've had these for a while and I can never really figure out a purpose for them. Normally when you're doing circuit design, you start with your high voltages and you work your way down through the lower voltages, but never go back up, that just creates a bottleneck. But that's what these things are designed to do, so I thought I'd give it a shot. Now, here's the reason why you don't do this. While it did initially work, the buck booster became really hot with all the current flowing through it. And once it was hot, the lamp would start to flicker and strobe. And that's not ideal. So, what was I to do? I guess I needed to make this a dual supply, and having two different power packs behind there. One 12 volt and the other 5. It's a bit annoying, but I think it's a lot safer than the alternative. I don't really want to start a fire, all this YouTubing equipment is expensive after all. I ordered some barrel jacks online and they arrived the next day. This will help make the connections a lot cleaner. I 3D printed some little wall parts to border the sign that the LED strip will stick to. I wasn't overly concerned about keeping them straight because I wanted a somewhat chaotic pattern shining out the sides there. Speaking of chaos, look at this mess. Now I have a clearer direction for where I'm headed, I can nail everything down and put it all together. I stick down the LED strip with some glue just to make sure that it holds, and now the border is fully screwed down and I can cut the strip to length and count the number of LEDs for the Arduino. I had 104 total. The Arduino is just running an RGB Twinkle demo from the Fast LED Examples catalog. The only thing I changed was the counted number of LEDs. At some stage I would like to come back and add more functionality. There's a lot of different things you can do with a strip of NeoPixels after all. And now a quick test before I put everything together for the final time. And then I encountered an issue with the 12 volt power supply. The power pack that I had rounded edges and the clip that I designed and printed for it wasn't grabbing it as well as I'd like. Thankfully, an old data runner's trick comes to save the day. Velcro binds us all together, mate. I was going to make some kind of wall hanging mount for it, but I think I'll get to that later. For the moment, I just want it sitting on the back of the couch. But I think I'm finally done with this one. All finished and assembled, it looks pretty good. Like I said before, the glow-in-the-dark effect left a lot to be desired. The pigment trapped in the resin needs a good charging with the UV light source before you get any kind of decent results. It would work nicely for an outdoor application, however. I might save the rest of the pigments I have for an outdoor job. I have one or two in mind. I also wouldn't mind adding a dimmer eventually. The welcome sign is a little bit too glowy. Other upgrades I would like to make would be a button to change the border LED modes. You could cycle between the different colours, and maybe add some other functions like an LED clock or even an equalizer. For the moment, however, I'm happy to sit in front of it and wish you all a fantastic day. And there you have it, folks. That's how I did it. That's my new welcome sign. I hope you like it. I'm pretty pleased with it. You know, it adds a little bit more flair to the place. You know, livens up the videos a bit. Speaking of videos, like and subscribe, and more importantly, tell your friends about me. Share the video around, you know, people who you think would enjoy the content. I could always use the new subscribers. Anyway, my name's been Morgan. This has been Morgan Makes. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers. Get a bit more better. Better, 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 better. Butter, 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 butter,